I'm going to mix some color here, dealing with the yellow and violet limited palette. We've got our ultramarine blue here and alizarin crimson. We've got ultramarine blue and cadmium red. We've got cerulean blue and cadmium red and cerulean blue and alizarin crimson. And we're gonna mix these into some groups of violets just to see how each one makes a different violet. You've made your color wheel and you've seen how those work for you. And in the color wheel, we only made one type of violet, and so you want to kind of see what the range is here. And again, you can kind of push out to a more transparent color to see it on the palette, to see whether you've got sort of a bluer violet or a redder violet. And this is pretty much in the middle there. So then you'll want to make your redder violet on the side and see how that is. So this is going to be your red violet with alizarin crimson, and of course you're using your darker, cooler blue with two transparent colors, and so you're going to get a very dark, cool violet. And I might want to add a little bit more to combat that. And you can be fairly extreme with it. You don't want it to be just blue. Like that still looks blue to me, even though we know it's technically a violet. So I might add a little bit more, just take some from here of the alizarin crimson to make a blue violet on this side. And you can go through and do this with all of the pairings, and that's what I'm going to do. You can speed up a little bit, and you can also check your various mixtures with white and see what kind of a blue violet you got. You're looking at it transparently, and then you're looking at it in a tinted form, right? So got your tinted form, and then your middle violet. And your red violet. A nice way to see how these make variations, different kinds of violets, and also to find out where there's not that much variation. So sometimes we might find that they actually make pretty similar violets, and that the differences might be more along the lines of where they're more transparent. So this might be a red violet, or more opaque. So this one has a slightly more opaque red violet than this, but they're very similar in color, aren't they? So you notice that, and why that might be a very subtle reason to choose one over the other, or it might even be inconsequential which one you choose. So this could be, this is looking more like a middle violet to me, so I'll put it there, and making a more blue violet. So we might also learn about the tinting strength. Again, we know this cadmium red has pretty high tinting strength from using it with the red-green. So you might need a little bit less of it with the blue. So there's a nice blue violet here. And And again, you can compare this blue violet with this blue violet, pretty similar. And adding white, we might see any variations. And so I leave this to you. You can look at my demonstration here just to know which ones are so similar that it's not really worth mixing a different variation. So this and this, pretty similar, right? It really has more to do with the opacity with these violets. At least that's what I'm seeing. And it always sort of surprises me to know that alizarin crimson and the cadmium red react pretty similarly to, you know, this has a little more blue in it, is probably what's going on, but it's pretty similar. So I might add a little bit more of the red. So you can play with that if you want to. Again, you could just watch this and see what you learn. The cerulean blue we know is a lighter, greener / warmer blue, and it's opaque as opposed to transparent generally. Of course, all of them can become transparent, but an opaque color, a transparent color can't become opaque unless you add an opaque color to it. So we're mixing the alizarin crimson, the cadmium blue, the cerulean blue. Thinking about getting that middle violet where it's not blue violet, it's not red violet. And again, looking at this middle violet, you know, you can see sort of the opacity of it. It's lighter in value. Very subtle difference. And can get our red violet over here. The tinting power of the cerulean is not as powerful as the ultramarine blue, so it's taking more blue to affect the cerulean. And so I might actually just take a little bit more. And we'll make our bluer violet over here. I think I need a little more. So again, you know, kind of looking at this blue violet versus this blue violet, we can add a little bit of white to each and see how that goes. So again, you're comparing the very subtle differences between the middle violets. Right, very similar. So again, surprising. It's like one of the reds or one of the blues, even though they have such differences, when mixed together with this particular palette, not very big differences. Okay. A little bit of a difference here where you see a much grayer sort of feeling with that cerulean. So the more quantity of cerulean, we definitely do see that that's going to be a different sort of blue-violet. All right, and then this last combo, again, we are seeing the tinting strength, the ability for that red to really transform the cerulean blue. Trying to get a middle violet. That's feeling pretty good, actually. And then just a little bit to get a blue violet. Okay, and then we'll mix. Again, we're going to see some similarities here. These are all going to vary, obviously, because of their origin colors, but also the quantity of red or blue. But you can see, again, these are quite similar. Even with different blues, they're making pretty similar violets. What am I doing? So again, because these are so similar, I think I've made my point, you really can kind of pick and choose, you know, maybe two different versions of these that you think will work for you, for your still life, to desaturate with the complement. You can mix a bunch of them just for the heck of it, knowing that you'll use them all. But I don't recommend you mix big giant piles of all of these because you likely won't use them all in the painting. You could mix up a little bit and just see the differences and the similarities, right? Also, to talk about the complements of these violets, we have only one yellow, your primary color. And we want to see how some of these might react to make a chromatic gray, just the way that your blue and orange did, and your red and green. So I'll go with this ultramarine, alizarin crimson, middle violet, and some yellow, and we'll mix these together to neutralize. And you'll see pretty quickly which one is dominating when you mix them together here, and how that middle violet definitely had a bit of blue in it, perhaps a higher quantity of blue than red, and it's making this sort of greenish color, which is a wonderful, if you're thinking about this yellow being desaturated and going into shadow and just slightly coming down off of its very brilliant self, a little bit of a middle violet will change it, just that much, and that will make it feel like it's in shadow. Also, if you're trying to get a kind of an interesting muted green, even though you might think to mix blue and yellow together right away, if you've got a greenish quality in your painting, you now know that violet and yellow can make this kind of interesting green. So I'm adding a little bit more of the violet to this, just to show it heading toward the more violet side, and how much more you can desaturate it and neutralize that. Right, so heading more toward the violet now. It's getting much darker and sort of more that brown, what color is it, neutral feeling, right? And then you could take more and see it heading even more neutral. So you then can take some white and some of that neutral and mix that together to show the chromatic gray or neutral color that you get from mixing the alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, and violet and yellow with white. And then again, these are some really important tones and grays to be able to mix your chromatic grays. So my guess is that all three of these middle ones would make slightly different, not my guess, I know, all different sort of neutrals, and you can try again a few of them. So you could kind of look at this one where you are seeing the cadmium red might be a little stronger, and add a little yellow to that to see what happens to neutralize that. And then maybe add a little bit of white to that to see the difference there. And kind of check that against this one if you leave a little bit more of the violet. So you can make many of these neutrals, and you can also look at how the this is the alizarin crimson, cerulean blue, the more red, violet, and yellow. How do they interact? And you'll see you get this more sort of orangey kind of color because the red and the yellow are dominating in that violet. I'm getting to a warmer type of neutralizing of that color. So if you had something that's yellow and it's going into shadow, and some of it feels sort of greenish and some of it feels sort of reddish, you can neutralize with this idea. or if you're thinking again about that brown paper that we painted, maybe this is the family that that's going to end up in. And if something has white added to it, how much it cools it off. And this is yet another chromatic gray that is coming from the mixture of violet and yellow. Again, with a bluer violet, and we could use the cerulean blue violet and yellow. We know that's going to head pretty green because it's a blue violet. But a kind of unexpected color comes from that. And then if, again, we add white to it, we see this kind of other chromatic gray developing. Very specific, very different from the others, right? So each one of these violets, whether they are bluer, redder, or middle, and then whether they have cerulean in them or cadmium or ultramarine or alizarin, crimson, are going to make different types of grays. And there are some really beautiful, surprising combinations you can get. You could also, of course, start to mix, you know, if you had something that was cool and warm, you're sort of dealing almost with that orange and blue palette again, because you're thinking of the bluer and the redder, and you can mix those together and see what happens there, right? So it's not that you can't intermix your chromatic grays. You certainly can. And so I would like you to make a lot of different chromatic grays with the violet and yellow palette. You don't necessarily have to mix up all of these violets, but you could kind of mix up 2 combinations of them or 3 and see how that goes, and then start intermixing so that you get a nice range of these chromatic grays to understand. In the next video, I'll show you our subject and why you're going to want to have an interesting range of chromatic grays to work with. All right, so I hope this makes some sense to you. And I will show you, actually, before I go, this is a sort of illustration of some color mixing that I did that involves showing each of these mixtures that I just made and their desaturation with yellow and some of the chromatic grays that I mixed along the way. So you kind of get a sense of how very similar these violets interact with yellow, but the subtle differences of a more yellow, red violet being mixed, etc. So you'll find these differences and you'll have some fun with that, hopefully. And you'll have a good juicy palette to work with on your next project. Okay, great.